John Sarianides, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons. Jake Hamilton is scheduled to join us. I know he was on assignment. Hopefully, he can join us over the course of the next 45 minutes. But until he does, or if he does, you've got me, you've got Lyons. What else do you need? John, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, believe it or not, Sarianides. We got, 3 shows, including this one, till the draft. Yeah. It's getting here, and the off-season program
Tuesday.
is underway.
Thursday, rather.
Yeah.
Tuesday.
The off-season program is finally underway, though.
It is. It's crazy. And as I just said before I stumbled, that the draft is 2 weeks from Thursday, which is crazy. I feel like we've been talking about the quarterbacks and what they're going to do and what they're not going to do for 6 months now. But in actuality, well, it's been 4 months.
We've been talking about quarterbacks in this draft ever since Mac threw that interception in Germany. So, I mean, it's been a while.
So in actuality, it has been like 6 months. So we finally get to find out what they're going to do here in a couple of weeks. Of course, the big news over the weekend was Kyle Duggar signing a 4-year, $58 million extension. $32 million of that is guaranteed. The deal could be north of $60 million with incentives. Just some thoughts on that. I know that a lot of people have had mixed feelings on it, John. I like the deal. I'll get into why, but I'd like your thoughts here. What are your thoughts on the Kyle Duggar extension?
Yeah, I like it as well. I think this is a good player. Now, is he as good a player as Mike Onwenu, another guy they re-signed this offseason? I wouldn't say he's quite that good, but he's a good player. They have a great safety tandem with him and Jabril Peppers. Depending on Marte Mapu's development, they could have a nice 3-safety package trio there with those 3 guys. So, and the thing about Duggar that I like a lot is how well-rounded his game is. Now, he was a little bit inconsistent in pass coverage last year, but he's been good in the past. But you just look at his 71 solo tackles. He had a forced fumble, 2 interceptions, 7 passes broken up. But then he had 1.5 sacks and 6 run stuffs. So he can play down in the box, which I think he's best down in the box. But he can play at the mid-level. He can play in the deeper part of the field when he needs to. He can cover guys as well. Again, he's going to get a little bit better in that area, bounce back per se from this past year. But I like the deal. I like that it's a guy they drafted and have developed. And I like the fit on the defense. And again, yeah, they were a 4-13 team. It wasn't the defense. They had a playoff defense, and they're bringing a good player back from that, and I like it.
Yeah, I do too. You know, I know a lot of people have been critical of Duggar's performance in coverage, and he has had some issues in the past, had some breakdowns last year. But for me, when you look at him in terms of where he fits in the safety landscape in the NFL, he is top 6 at the position, and that's what he's getting paid at. Now, again, I've had people push back on that notion with me, you know, off the air saying, what do you mean top 6? How could you say that? And I come back with the same thing, John. Okay, fine. If you don't think Kyle Duggar's a top 6 safety, you're entitled to your opinion. Name, I'm not even going to say 5 safeties that are better than him right now, but name 4 of them. And what you end up finding is, yeah, there are some guys that are better than him because they're more well-rounded players. But again, this is not the wide receiver position. This is not the cornerback position. This isn't quarterback. This isn't left tackle. Safety is not necessarily a premium position, but like all positions now, John, you're going to have to pay if you want a top 10, top 5 player in the league to stay on your roster in any position. So for me, I think that this is a pretty good deal for them. You're getting a guy on a second contract. Patriots have always been a 2-contract organization. Very few guys have gotten 3rd contracts or more. Really, when you look at the way the Patriots operated under Bill Belichick, it was great players that got that 3rd contract or more. I don't know if Duggar gets a 3rd contract here, but I think when you look at the AAV on this thing, it's pretty good. It puts him in the top 6. It's right about where he is as a player. And look, you obviously hope that in this system, they help him out a little bit. He gets better in coverage. He could do a little bit more for them. But I agree with you. If Marte Mapu develops, along with Jabril Peppers, now with Duggar, you got these 3 guys in the fold. Peppers is up after next year, but you've got these 3 guys in the fold. Now you can go back to playing more of those 3 safety looks because those guys can play at all 3 levels. You can mix, you can match, you can do some different things with them. That's a pretty good position for the Patriots to be in.
Yeah, and I think especially look at where they're at corner, right? Gonzalez, I think, is a really good player, and I think Jonathan Jones, he's one of my favorite players on the team. I think he's really good as well. But there's some question marks beyond that. I mean, Marcus Jones is coming off a big injury. Alex Austin, I like a lot, but he's limited playing time, limited experience. They might want to go 3 safety packages more than they would traditional nickel with 3 corners. And again, if Mapu develops, I think it can be an asset for them. And one thing about this Patriots system, and the reason I say system is because with Mayo and Covington leading the defense, I think we're going to see the same system and concepts as what we saw under Belichick. They've always had highly talented safeties. And right, so like a couple themes, Patriots defense, when they've been good, they've always had one good 3 technique, one good defensive end, one legit shutdown corner, and highly talented safeties too. Like it might not be thought of as a premium position, but I mean, just Lawyer Malloy was highly talented. Rodney Harrison, Devin McCourty, and Patrick Chung were both picked in the first 2 rounds of the draft. Even Jabril Peppers, I know it took him a little while to get here, but he was a first round pick, highly talented player. So they've always wanted highly talented and versatile guys at the safety position. And I think that's what, again, he's got to get better in pass coverage. I know he's 28, so he's probably not going to get a 3rd contract, but that talent level and that versatility, that's what Duggar represents. I think it's a big reason why they paid him, and it's also a big reason why I like it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people also look at Duggar and their first thought is that he played at Lenore-Rhyne and he was a 2nd-round pick. Who cares? The beauty of the NFL draft is you can get a player in any of the 7 rounds. Unlike the other 3 major sports where you really want to hit early in the draft, you want to do that with the NFL draft too. But as you know, it's a 7-round draft. There's going to be players sprinkled throughout the draft. Tom Brady, pick 199, best example of all time. So for me, I don't care that he played at Division II Lenore-Rhyne. I don't care that he was a 2nd-round pick. At the end of the day, he's a good football player. He fits what they like to do schematically. He's a 3x3 safety. He can do a lot of different things. There is no player in the league, even the great ones that don't have flaws. Patrick Mahomes, as great as he is, he turns the ball over a lot. He did that last year. So, you know what? There isn't a single player in the league that isn't going to have a flaw. Duggar's flaw is over the top in coverage at times. He's not a true free safety. In fact, I think he profiles more as a strong safety and a box safety. But for me, I like the deal. Look, their plan is abundantly obvious here. They're going to take a quarterback at 3. They're going to take their time developing him. They're going to try to get by with veterans for this season. They're going to run the football, and they're going to play good defense. And they hope that tried and true formula allows them to be competitive. They're not going to rush the young quarterback they're going to draft. They're going to try to be patient with him, and they're going to try to win on the strength of their running game and their defense. They've got the pieces on defense to once again be a top 10 unit. Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson stay healthy. They could be a really nice 1-2 punch at running back. Of course, the offensive line is a big question mark. But to me, I think that is the plan here. That's why they invested so much in keeping a lot of this defense together, because they see it as, hey, we want to do it right at quarterback, give this kid a chance to develop. Here's our 4-year window to get them to where we want them to go. We're going to do it on the strength of our defense. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, the offseason program began yesterday. Hunter Henry and Jabril Peppers both met with the media today. Pretty interesting comments. A lot of Belichick, Mayo, and what it's been like so far. And, and I give the players a lot of credit, John, and I saw a lot of this last season in the locker room too, where a lot of these guys didn't take the bait when it came to talking about Belichick versus another coach or Belichick and whether or not he was going to be back or not. They, especially guys on defense, they were pretty steady in what they had to say in terms of Belichick and their appreciation for him and his greatness and what he brings to the table despite the way the season was going. But it was interesting today. Peppers had a couple of interesting comments about how they love playing for Belichick. What he did here speaks for itself. But if it was time for a change, Mayo's been a breath of fresh air. What do you make of some of the comments that came out of there today?
Yeah, I think you are correct on both points. There was plenty of times, I believe it was Peppers himself who said late last season, hey, what Bill's saying is going to happen in the game is happening and we're not executing, right? I mean, which, look, did they make coaching and personnel mistakes? Yeah, that's why he's not here. But there was execution mistakes, which is why they lost 13 games last year too. And I think you're right. They didn't take the bait throughout last year. Hunter Henry never took the bait. And I think those are two guys that it's good to have them kind of not leading here in some of these comments, because we've seen Elliot Wolf and Gerard Mayo have made a few comments over the past couple months that have gotten them in a little bit of hot water. Maybe whether they misspoke or just it got misinterpreted. Whereas I think Hunter Henry and Jabril Peppers are guys that you don't have to worry about anything like that. I thought Hunter Henry himself did a good job illustrating, hey, this is just how things are with Mayo now and the things he liked about it. And he didn't give the impression that he was dumping on Belichick or disagreed with something. So I thought he did a good job with that. And let's be honest with ourselves, John. This is something they're going to have to deal with all year, especially if they don't have a good record, right? Like, let's say they're, 6-11 or whatever, just throwing a number out there, or they're 7-10. They're going to get these. Oh, do you think it would have been better with Bill? Do you think it would have been better? Yeah. You know it. I know it, right? They're going to have to. They're going to deal.
Revisionist history is always a thing in year one for any coach.
Yeah, and they're going to deal with this in August. Oh, do you think this training camp is better or worse than Coach Belichick ran it? Right? Like, they're going to deal with it in August, September, October. They're going to. This is not going to end until the Patriots get back to an AFC Championship game, and that could be 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, right? That's not going to happen overnight, but that's just how long these questions are going to persist, especially if a year from now Bill Belichick's the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys or someone else, and he's contending for a Super Bowl. Those questions are going to persist. So I think it's good to have guys like Henry and like Peppers kind of out in front, because I think those are guys that the rest of the locker room can kind of take a cue from, because look, these questions are going to be there, but the better you handle them, I think the less of an impact and a distraction they'll have.
Yeah, and look, I think the players wanted Mayo, and I think that they're happy that Mayo got the job, and I think they're going to play hard for him. And I think one of the themes that you keep hearing is that he's been in the meeting room. He's sat in the same chairs we're sitting in. He knows what we're going through. And that matters more to players than it probably should. But again, I get it. If you didn't play the game at their level, if you didn't go through what they did, they want someone who can relate. But I think too much is made of that nowadays, John, where today's athlete in all sports wants the former player coaching them. And I'm not sure that's always the best thing. I mean, at the end of the day, Belichick didn't play in the NFL, and he's arguably the greatest coach of all time. He won 6 Super Bowls here. So to me, just because you played at that level doesn't mean you know what you're doing and could be a good coach. All that being said, I do think that relatability was important to the Crafts. That's a big reason why they pegged Mayo as the successor to Belichick. And I think that you're like anything else, you're going to have that honeymoon period early on, and everything's going to be, everyone's going to be saying the right things, and everybody's going to be pulling the rope in the same direction. But as you just said, the first time you have any hint of adversity and the team's not playing well and you're losing games, it's human nature for people to say, man, how would things be if Bill were still here? Or let's say they lose a game where Mayo makes a certain decision in a certain situation and it doesn't go their way. What would Belichick have done in that situation? So I think a lot of it is, again, you're going through that honeymoon phase right now. Everybody's on board. Everybody's excited to play for Mayo. Obviously, having success will go a long way in determining whether or not this football team is going to stay behind Gerard Mayo and want to play for him. And, of course, the Patriots also announced that on Thursday they will be making a couple more players available. Of course, the media will be, in person for the first round on night 1. And on May 11th, they're going to give the media access to rookie minicamp, which is rare. Belichick was
I can't remember a time.
Yeah, I don't think Belichick ever did that, to be honest with you. So it'll be interesting to see for sure. You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by WEEI's and New England Football Journal's John Lyons. Jake Hamilton is on assignment. If he can join us tonight, he will. If not, no biggie. Lyons and I have it on lockdown here for you. John, of course, the other big story this past week was the top 30 visits. Drake May was in town last week. Jaden Daniels yesterday. I believe J.J. McCarthy is scheduled to be in town either tomorrow or Thursday. Just some thoughts on that. It's abundantly obvious that if they take a quarterback with that third pick, as we've been saying all along, it's going to be one of those 3 guys.
Yeah, and I think to even go further, I think it's going to be Daniels or May. And I know there's been reports this week, and Michael Hawley even said on NBC Sports Boston last night that they really like McCarthy, and they could be considering him at 3. And look, I think that's possible, but I think you could trade down a few spots and get McCarthy. I think that'd be kind of a reach at 3. But irregardless of that, like, I just don't see McCarthy being the guy at 3. I think it's May or I think it's Daniels. And I think these visits help in that because, look, the game tape is the most important thing, obviously. But now we're right before the draft. You can, and the pro days are so scripted. These visits can really put the guy in your environment and you can see, hey, how does he react to what we want him to react to? Is he still in good shape even after his pro day? Or did you just, did Jaden Daniels just add weight for his pro day and now he's back down, right? Does Drake May, did he sail some balls at his pro day because he's nervous? Or is he going to be nervous in the NFL and we see that at a top 30 visit, right? So something like, I think those little things you can pick up there. So yeah, I think they're definitely valuable. Now, can they take a guy that they didn't have a top 30 visit with? In general, I would say yes, but not at 3 overall. I don't think you're going to take a guy at 3 overall that you haven't had visit. So yeah, look, I think they're valuable. I think it's still going to be Daniels or May to me unless they trade down.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to come down to one of those two. I don't see them trading down. I think it's going to be Drake May. I think that the Commanders like what Daniels brings to the table. I think he's probably their preferred pick, barring them shocking the football world and trading out of 2, which I don't see. They're going to end up taking one of those 2 guys. I've said it all along. I think if you read the tea leaves, this was their 3rd meeting with Drake May. I think Drake May is ultimately the guy that they're honing in on. And look, a lot of people in the media like to say stupid shit, and I get it. It's a part of the deal here. But, I mean, can we stop with the smokescreen stuff? I get it. It's lying season. It's smokescreen season. And you know what? All this McCarthy stuff is a smokescreen. It's not, folks. It's not. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. There were a lot of people in 2018 that did not think Baker Mayfield was going to go number 1 overall, and he did. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what Lyons thinks, I think, anybody else in this market thinks. They're going to take the player that they think best represents and fits what they want. My issue all along, John, and I said this to you last week, has been I hope that if you're entrusting Elliott Wolf to make this decision, that he's going to be around here for a while making other personnel decisions. Don't let him pick your quarterback of the future and then you jettison him out of here and he's now your general manager next year or your primary decision maker. I think at the end of the day, if you're going to let him shop for the proverbial groceries, he's got to be around here for a while. But I think if you read the tea leaves, I think it's Drake May. And we're going to talk about this again the next couple of shows before the draft. But I really believe he's the guy. As long as he's there, he's the guy. Now, do I see them swapping with Washington to secure taking him? No, I don't. I think they're going to stick and pick, as Daniel Jeremiah would say. But I think their preference would be Drake May.
Yeah, it feels kind of that way to me. Like, and again, this is another valuable part of these top 30 visits. What if you end up not liking one of them? Because I think that is just as informative of, like, let's say they love Drake May and they like Jaden Daniels or vice versa. Well, they could essentially, I mean, they'd be happier with Drake May at 3, but they could take either one. But if they come away from the tape they've watched from their games in the fall and these top 30 visits, and let's just say they say, you know what, hey, we don't like Drake May, something about we don't like, well, then it informs what you're going to do at 3 because, if he's there, you're going to trade out or take someone else and he's not the guy. Like, that's another piece of this. You can find out, is there, and by the way, this goes for beyond just the quarterbacks. They've had a bunch of other guys for these visits. You might find there's guys you don't like, for better or worse. Sometimes you end up being right about it, sometimes wrong, but that's another piece of this. So again, the stuff in the fall is the most important part, but I think these top 30 visits, I put them higher than the pro days. I put them higher than the combine because you're taking that prospect to your building, putting them in situations that you want them in, that maybe you think are going to translate closer to the actual NFL as opposed to his scripted pro days or the combine. So it feels like May is that guy, but that's why I think this top 30 visit with him especially is so important in Daniels because they can make sure, hey, we like one guy better than the other. We like one guy, don't like one guy. We like both. We don't like either. That can really help solidify that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind here, too, is, and it's interesting, you mentioned Michael Hawley and his comments about J.J. McCarthy recently. Tom Curran and Phil Perry were talking about this the other night on the same show, and they were talking about how Mac Jones got Belichick fired. And it's important that they get this right because this next quarterback could end up getting Elliott Wolf and possibly Gerard Mayo fired. I don't think you can operate like that. Okay. And I'll say this. I feel that there's more of a consensus with this pick within the organization now than there was in 2021 with Mac Jones. You heard different things. Parcells wanted Parcells. Belichick wanted Micah Parsons, possibly he wanted to trade down. He wasn't sold on Mac Jones. Ultimately, his feelings regarding Mac Jones and the type of player he was, at least for now, have proven to be true. But I feel like there's more of a consensus, and maybe it's because they're picking third overall too, and they do need to be more on the same page than they might have needed to be if they were picking 15th. But I feel like there's more uniformity here in terms of who they want, what they want, and the player they're going to take.
Yeah, I would think so. And I feel like you go back to the 2021 draft, there was more tension in that front office at that time because they had several drafts in a row that were not good. Robert Kraft had even said, we want a more collaborative approach. So Dave Ziegler had a larger voice. The scouting department had a larger voice, which in some cases, right, with Christian Barmore and Ramondre Stevenson, it worked out really well that year. Obviously, with Mac, it didn't. But I think that's the thing, maybe and again, I don't think anybody disliked Mac. But I think whoever they pick at 3 this year across the board, they're all going to be more excited about than they were about Mac in 2021. Because again, I think there was more tension in the front office at that time. And also just naturally, the quarterback at 3 overall should be a much better player than the quarterback at 15 overall. Like, I'm not guaranteeing that, but he should be. And I think that will also create some more excitement. And then there's the whole thing, John, and you can put into this what you want, but I think it's a thing. The idea of the fresh start. Oh, it's something new. Hey, we're turning the page. This is the next face of the franchise. Whereas in 2021, it was, hey, Tom Brady just won a Super Bowl. Cam Newton can't throw anymore. We have to have a guy. Yeah, we like Mac. He's pretty good. So we'll take him at 15. Whereas this is, I just think there's, because of other circumstances, a little bit more natural excitement there too.
Yeah, no, I agree. But, and I think, look, the other thing to keep in mind here is that when you look at who they could potentially take here, whether it be Daniels, whether it be May, whether it be McCarthy, all 3 of those guys are physically better than Mac Jones was.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I think that the 2021 quarterback draft class is a reminder that there's no such thing as a generational quarterback class. It's such a fickle position. Remember, go back to last year. Everybody had Bryce Young as a cut and dry number 1 quarterback in that class. And sometimes you just have to look at 1 or 2 things about a guy and say, I don't see it. And for me, it was the 5'11", 190. I'm like, look, I coached football for 30 years. And granted, it was high school and small college, but I want no part of 5'11", 190 if I'm coaching in the NFL. If you're going to be 5'11", 190, and I get Bryce Young was a player at Alabama, put up big numbers, of course, played for current Boston College head coach Bill O'Brien. He was his OC, and of course he played for Nick Saban. But that to me was a sticking point. And it was a big reason why I liked Stroud over him. Plus the fact that I just felt that Stroud mechanically, fundamentally, from an arm strength standpoint, he was just a better quarterback. But again, I hate to belabor this point. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder here. When you look at this class, these top 3 guys, top 4 guys even, they're better than Mac Jones was. Question is, can they capitalize on the abilities that they have? Here's the thing. If they all develop, unlike Mac Jones, you're going to be able to get away with maybe having a little bit of a lesser skill group around these guys than you would have had to have for Mac. I think Mac needed to play with elite skill to be the player that he needed to be for them to win. With one of these guys, you might not necessarily have to have elite skill around them to still win football games.
Yeah, and one thing I like about, those few guys, they all had to kind of go through some adversity in college, whereas, and not just to dump on Mac, but he didn't. And I think that makes it different. Like, you look at the good quarterback.
Yeah, people saying that he had to compete for the starting job, that's not adversity. I mean, come on, that's competition.
Yeah. And
these guys had to compete too.
Yeah, and some of them had to transfer. If you look at the good quarterbacks the really good quarterbacks, like Mahomes had serious questions about him coming out of the draft he had to overcome. Joe Burrow had to transfer schools. Josh Allen had big questions about him. Lamar Jackson fell all the way to 32 because there were questions about how his body would hold up. Like, I think for a quarterback, for any player, but a quarterback especially, having some adversity to overcome in college is really valuable in the NFL, especially those early years, because we saw Mac got hit with some adversity in 2022, which was Belichick's fault with Patrician Judge, but he didn't really do a good job overcoming it. And then he didn't do a good job overcoming adversity this past year. Whereas those other guys, like when Joe Burrow got hurt, he came back in his first fully healthy year. He led a team to the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes took a while to become a starter, and he's been the best guy in the league. Josh Allen had some bad seasons early in his career. Now he's blossomed into one of the best players in the league. So, point being, I think the fact that like McCarthy overcame some adversity in Michigan, had his coach suspended multiple times. Drake May has some adversity come out. Hey, how good can this guy really be, right? Jaden Daniels had to transfer schools. Even Caleb Williams had to transfer schools. So I think that, to me, like, it's tough to quantify that, but I think it really matters. And that's something that these guys have too that we didn't have with Mac in 2021.
No, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. So we'll see. Like I said, we're going to have this conversation over and over again, like we have had for the last 6 months.
Ever since Mac threw that interception in Germany. Put your sausage and bratwurst down and talk about the quarterbacks.
Talk about the quarterbacks, and we've been doing it nonstop since. But let's talk about some other positions now, because it's not just about the quarterbacks. It's about other positions as well. We're going to take a look at the offensive line, specifically offensive tackle and wide receiver this week. And we're going to start with the wide receivers. Obviously, this is a deep receiver class. But, John, I say this every year now, and I feel like I've been saying it for the last 8 to 10 years. Wide receiver is going to be a deep position every year now. The game has changed. With spread offenses infiltrating youth football, high school football, it's the predominant offense in college. It's becoming the predominant offense in the NFL, with the spread taking over and spread concepts being such a big part of the game nowadays. The one position that I think you're going to be developing in an abundance is wide receiver. There's going to be wide receivers every single year. This year is no different. Obviously, they're going to take a quarterback at 3. I think we can all agree on that. It's what happens after that. What do they do at pick 34? And by the way, I still think that pick is in play, because I'm a firm believer that they're going to try to trade back into the first round, especially if a player is falling that they have high on their board and they like. I could see them using 34 in future compensation to get back into the first round. But we're not going to delve into that tonight. Let's just assuming that they stay where they are and they pick. Let's start with the wide receivers. Assuming they take a quarterback at 3, who are some wide receivers that you like late first, early second, that would be good fits for the Patriots?
So my favorite one in that range, Brian Thomas out of LSU. He's 6'4", 205. He 68 catches, a little over 1,100 yards. I think it's 17 touchdowns last year. And look, the thing about him, and this isn't scientific, but there's certain guys, John, and you know this as a coach for a lot of years, that when they're out there, they just look a little bit different. They operate a little bit different at a little bit of a higher. And when I watch him, and I know he had Malik Neighbors on the other side, I know he had Jaden Daniels throwing to him, but he just looks different. He's so strong. He's so tough, but he's really fast as well. Like, this is a guy, you can put him at X, and he can start, I think, from day one and be a really good player in this offense from day one. And I think he's a guy that, I could see him going 12th or 13th overall if a team really likes him, but I could see him being there at 25, 26 overall if they want to trade back up and in. I mean, he would be the guy at the top of my list. I like Xavier Legette as well. I like Keon Coleman a lot. Troy Franklin's a little thin for me. A.D. Mitchell, kind of same thing. But the guy at the top of my list in that range, Brian Thomas.
Yeah, I've been pretty consistent with this opinion. I really would rather see them take an offensive tackle at 34.
Yeah, and I wouldn't argue that either.
I just think you don't have a left tackle right now. I mean, it is a position of need. And, yeah, you can talk about a core of 4 and him coming in and he can play left tackle, and that's fine. This is a knock on him. But I do think you need someone that could come in and be a long-term fit at that position. And I'm hoping a guy like Tyler Guyton, who they're bringing in for a top 30 visit, I'm hoping that he falls to them at 34. That would be ideal. Don't see it happening. There's going to be a run on offensive tackles at the end of the first round. A lot of teams need help at that position, so I don't see a guy like that falling to him. But I'd like to see them go offensive tackle at 34. We're going to come back to offensive tackle in a sec. Now, if they go offensive tackle at 34, that means they'd have to go receiver later, which I'm okay with. There's a lot of talent at the position late day 2, early day 3. You got Jalen Polk out of Washington, who I love. You've got Roman Wilson out of Michigan, who, despite my disdain for Michigan as an Ohio State fan, I really like Roman Wilson and what he can do. He reminds me a lot of Tyler Lockett, a 3-level difference maker. You got Javon Baker, a guy that they've talked to out of Central Florida. Xavier Legette is another guy to keep an eye on as well. So, and Malachi Corley, another guy that I like out of Western Kentucky. So
Brendan Rice out of USC.
Brendan Rice, who they've met with, and I love the son of Jerry Rice.
6'3", 210. He, to me, if you're picking at the end of the 3rd round, that he's in that, that 3rd to 4th round, I think you can have him there. And I think he's a guy that finds a way to be available there. And I think even if they took a receiver at 34, if there's, in that case, I would definitely want to tackle in round 3. But then if they sit there in round 4 and Brendan Rice is there, to me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree. And I've talked to a couple of people that said to me that the Patriots really like him. So, and again, I know a lot of people are going to say, son of Jerry Rice, well, you got to draft him. I mean, if he's half as good as his father, that's a fair point, but that's not why you draft him. The kid put up big numbers at USC.
Yeah, he was good in his own
receiver. Right. He's good in his own right, big-bodied receiver, strong hands, can win in contested catch situations. He's comfortable stacking and competing for the ball in jump ball situations. I just think, to me, when you look at him, I think he's what they need. They need that big X receiver that they can make the focal point of the offense in plus territory, especially in the red zone. And look, they got to come away from this draft with a couple of receivers, in my opinion. Yeah. I don't think you just take one. I think they got to come away with a couple, because while you bring back Smith-Schuster and you bring back Kendrick Bourne, you have Pop Douglas back. It's, Keyshawn Butte, we'll see, to be determined. But it's a position of need. They need at least 2 guys in this draft that can come in and help. They did bring in KJ Osborne, who I think is a sneaky good signing. He could end up being really productive for him. But I'd like to see a couple more guys in this draft as well.
Yeah, and they just don't have that guy on the outside, bigger body guy who can either burn you deep or go up and get a pass. They have a lot of guys like Kendrick Bourne, and by the way, Kendrick Bourne and Juju Smith-Schuster are both coming off injuries, so that should be noted too. But Kendrick Bourne's a guy, he can take a 10-yard pass for 35 yards, which is a very valuable thing. Demario Douglas can do that as well. Neither one of those guys, though, can just run a 40-yard post and catch it for a touchdown, right? That's the thing I think they're missing in this offense, that guy on the outside that can actually draw coverage. Tyquan Thornton's not, I don't think he's ever going to be that guy, unfortunately. I just don't see it. So that guy's missing, and I agree with you. I'd like 2 guys. I would like a guy for that, but I'd also like another guy, whether it's another X type just to go with it, or a Z type that you think, you can have a package with, whoever you picked for X plus Kendrick Bourne plus Douglas, and then a rookie receiver kind of developing behind one of those 3 guys too.
Yeah, no, I agree. Ken Mathias checks in. Thanks for checking in, Ken. Appreciate it as always. Question at 34, would you draft Brian Thomas from LSU or Keon Coleman? Well, it's Brian Thomas to me. I just don't think he's going to be there. I think he's going to be long gone by then.
Yeah, I agree. Unless some teams are worried about was it because of Daniels and Neighbors? But I just think just look at him objectively. He's good. I think he's better than Keon Coleman. I think,
Yeah. And Keon Coleman, to me, as dominant as he was in the SEC, especially in the red zone, he's, his testing numbers don't jump out at you. And in that offense, and I will say this, I saw them play in person. I covered the BC game this year when Florida State was in town, and I wasn't impressed with that skill group. I know a lot of people were. Jordan Travis, to me, is a late day 3 career backup type. When I look at Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, big-bodied receivers that could win one-on-one, and Coleman more so was a playmaker than Wilson. But, again, they didn't pop to me. They weren't guys that they can make that spectacular catch in man coverage or in a one-on-one situation. But to your point, John, this is an offense that needs a big play element. And it's not just a big play element when you're in plus territory. If you ideally have a guy that can take it to the house from 60 yards out, that would be nice. They haven't had that around here in a long time. So for me, you need guys that can make big plays.
And just simplify it this way. If you're a defensive coordinator, Who in the Patriots passing game do you game plan to stop right now? You really worried
Nobody.
about
Hunter
anybody?
Henry, probably.
Like, yeah, and I guess Demario Douglas too. And I love Demario Douglas, but we're talking about a second-year guy, who was picked in the 6th round. Like, I think he can be really good, but is he a guy you're going to worry about game planning around in his second year? Like, they don't have that guy in the past. Even Hunter Henry, he's a good player, but if he goes off, it's not a guarantee the Patriots
No.
win because they don't have
No.
anything else there. So it's like that's the thing they're like. There's nobody there that you're like, oh my god, we have to stop him. Which there always has been that guy when they've been good. And that's why I think they got to walk away from this draft with a guy like that. I'm
They
not saying
do.
that
Yeah.
they're going to get Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors at the top, but they need to walk away with a guy that other teams at least say, hey, we got to devote some thought and some resources to stopping that guy because I don't think they have a guy like that right now.
And I think that's why I keep saying I think if a player that they like that's high on their board is dropping, like any other team, we're not used to this with Bill Belichick. Like most other teams, though, if they're willing to trade 34 and another pick in this draft and maybe future compensation, if they can get into the first round, if a Brian Thomas, for whatever reason, and again, I think it's a long shot, but if he's slipping and falling or Tyler Guyton is slipping and falling, those are the guys you trade back into the first round and you go get. Because if you can come out of this draft with a guy that profiles as a number one receiver or a future starting left tackle who could develop into a franchise left tackle potentially, and your franchise quarterback, you did a pretty good job. So we'll see. Let's see. Ken checks back in. Pats don't have flashy wide receivers, but you guys are right. They need someone that draws double coverage. Things have been quiet on the Higgins front. Should they still attempt to get him or a Diggs-like trade for a wide receiver? That's a great question, Ken, and I think you bring up a great point. But for me, at this point, John, I think you're young. I mean, I'm not giving up pick 34 for T. Higgins at this point. You might as well, because here's the other thing you got to keep in mind: you got to pay him. That's a big part of this. You got to pay him. So you're not just giving up a premium pick, but you also have to pay the guy. You have to extend him. So for me at this stage of the game and where this organization is, John, I'm not sure I give up a premium pick and big money for T. Higgins.
I would. I'd give up 34 for him or for Ayuk or for Metcalf. I mean, the list isn't that long. I would do it for a couple reasons. A, they have the money to pay him. B, I still trust the receiver that's done it in the NFL more than the rookie. And those guys are young enough that they can be here for 3 or 4 years, still be in their prime years when the Patriots are hopefully really good once again. Like if it was like I wouldn't have done it for Stephon Diggs because I think by the time the Patriots are really good, he might not have anything left in the tank, right? So I wouldn't have done it for him. But if it's a guy that's in his mid 20s, 20, even 26, 27 that within 2 or 3 years, right, he'll still be under 30, then I would consider doing it. But it's still a small list because 34 is a very valuable pick to have, whatever you want to do with it. So I'd be open to it, but it's a very short list of guys.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, what I actually would love to see them do is trade back. And then if you want to use, let's say, 41 or 42, let's say you decide to trade back, if you want to use that pick for a veteran receiver, I'm okay with it. But I just think with the amount of needs that they still have, that's a premium pick. And again, the other thing to keep in mind here is you got to pay a guy like a T. Higgins or a guy like an Ayuk. You're going to probably waste year one, maybe even to a certain degree year two on the development of a young quarterback. So, yeah, and I know people will say, yeah, but they have Jacoby Brissett. He'll be able to get those guys the ball. I get that, and I have no doubts that Brissett can do that. The only thing I'll say is you're not in a position where if you trade for one of those two guys that you're going to get your money's worth in return year one or year two. It's going to take some time, and it's really going to be more down the road that you're hoping that you get your bang for your buck out of them.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, but that's why, again, I'm only targeting a limited amount of guys based on the age, right? Because I don't want a guy who's 30 or even 29, that range, 29, 31, because by the time you're good enough for that to be really valuable, he might not have what you want anymore, right? So that's what, and it'd be the same thing if we were talking about pick 34 for an established offensive tackle. I'd tell you the same thing as well, right? Like I want a guy who is young enough that in 2 or 3 or 4 years, when they're a great team once again, which hopefully is a lot closer to the 2 years than the 4 years, that guy is still there and he's still able to contribute at a really high level.
And let's use that as a pivot point to talk about the offensive tackles. Of course, it's no secret left tackle is a major need for this football team. I drew the line in the sand and I said at 34, I'd like to see them take an offensive tackle. I think it's more important for them in the long-term future of the franchise and the franchise quarterback. We all think they're going to draft at 3, or the potential franchise quarterback. With all that being said, John, who are some of the tackles that you like in this draft that could be a good value for them at 34 or even after that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna just stay away from Olu Fashanu and Troy Fatanu. I don't think they're gonna be there at 34. I'm sorry. Like you mentioned the name Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. I find him really interesting. Like he's 6'7", 327, ton of talent. There's some rawness there that I think needs to be developed, but like all the tools I feel like are there. And again, if you have a good coaching staff, I think Scott Peters is a good O-line coach. The Browns had good offensive lines pretty much every year he was there, I think, except one. So I like Tyler Guyton there. Jordan Morgan's another guy out
I
of
like him a
Arizona.
lot out of Arizona.
Yeah, 6'6". I
A
mean,
great year last year.
I was going to say he played better than Tyler Guyton last year. So he's a guy that really interests me. But what I find interesting about this draft, John, there's guys like now I'm talking around 3, 4, 5. Blake Fisher, Matt Goncalves, Isaiah Adams, like Javon Foster, out of Mizzou, who's a 3-year starter. Like those are
Patrick Paul out of Houston.
Yeah, like those are guys that
Caden Wallace, Fisher and Wallace are guys that they have top 30 visits with.
Yeah, like those are guys I feel like you could get on day 3 and could actually play a significant role for you at tackle. Like I don't think it would be like when they drafted Andrew Stuber a few years ago and thought he'd play a big role, and Chase and Hines and those guys didn't work out. I think these guys that I met, like they're a little more polished and they got a little bit more to their game. And I like the fit. Like I would love for them to come away with this draft taking at 34 whoever they have as their best tackle or best receiver, whatever they like better. Then in the 3rd round, take the opposite and then add another tackle later in the draft. Like I want 2 tackles out of this draft because look, Mike Onwenu's here to stay at right tackle, but I want a couple shots at who my next left tackle is. And I think there's enough talent in this draft. You can find that guy and a productive swing tackle beyond that.
Yeah, a guy like Darrell Simpson out of Tulsa, who they also had a top 30 visit with. He's a guy day 3, really versatile, can play tackle. He's been primarily a right tackle. Can also kick inside the guard. He's big. He's got long arms. He plays with power. Not a natural bender. You want guys that can bend at the hips and the knees at that position. But another guy that they really like that could be a possibility for them on day 3. They do. I agree with you. They need to come away with 2 tackles ideally in this draft and 2 receivers. And again, people are going to say, well, they only have so many picks. I understand that. But outside of addressing cornerback, which I think they should address early in day 3, possibly edge. You've got Jalex Hunt, who is got a top 30 visit scheduled with the Patriots. You've also got Mohamed Kamara, another guy that has a top 30 or has met with the Patriots. These are 2 guys that I think would be pretty good fits for them as edge guys. So, yeah, you have needs, but for me, quarterback, offensive tackle, wide receiver, huge needs. Maybe you throw tight end in there. I'd like to see them come away with a young tight end. I know they have a top 30 visit scheduled with Jared Wiley out of TCU, someone like that, a Theo Johnson out of Penn State. Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing them come away with a young tight end in those middle rounds as well. But I think their needs are pretty clearly defined, John. I think that offensive tackle, specifically left tackle, wide receiver, are huge needs for them.
Yeah, and I think they've been huge needs the entire offseason. This is why, I know when we talked in free agency, we thought them not going after, at least I did, Jonah Williams was a mistake. And obviously they put out a big offer to Calvin Ridley. I know he ended up getting overpaid, but they pursued him pretty strongly. They know it's their needs too. So I think their first 3 picks, unless something crazy happens, it's going to be QB, receiver, tackle in one order or another. But I think the first 3 picks they make are going to be at those 3 positions. And I think you're going to see later in the draft another receiver and another tackle. I think they're going to walk away with at least those 5 guys on offense. And not to say they don't have any needs for depth on defense, but you could roll in the defensive roster you have right now into training camp, and you'd still have a pretty good defense. You need a lot more help, and relatively young defensively too. You need a lot more help on offense. And this is where, like you mentioned, trading down from 34 and using that to get a T. Higgins or an Ayuk. And I think it's something we could see them trade down from, say, 34 to 42, 43. And that extra ammo they get draft capital wise later in the draft goes to that extra tackle or that extra receiver. And running back's another one. Like, I mean, I like Marshawn Lloyd out of USC as like a later round guy. Like, there's later round guys at running back you can get that can complement
And Ray
Stevenson.
Davis, who they've met with, is another one from Kentucky.
Yeah,
but I like a lot.
But the problem with that is you have Stevenson and Gibson, so you really can't use a pick on a running back unless you have those other three major needs already addressed. So I think that's why those first three picks, I think in some order, is going to be QB, tackle, and receiver, and I'd be kind of surprised if it wasn't.
No, I agree, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is that if you do trade out of 34, to your point, that extra ammunition not only comes in handy for a possible trade, although realistically they're probably going to use the extra picks and take players. But I think the other thing to keep in mind here is it allows you to address other positions because, again, cornerback is a position of need for them. Running back, you need a young back that you can bring in here. Remember, Ramondre Stevenson is a free agent after next season. Antonio Gibson is only on a one-year deal. That position is probably going to be reimagined next offseason. It's going to be a position of emphasis unless they decide to bring back Stevenson. But I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that I think a lot of Patriot fans are looking forward to them just picking players, John, and addressing needs. Because with Bill Belichick, especially in recent years, it was so much about value and not nearly enough about, hey, this is what we need. This is who fills the need. Let's go out and get them.
Yeah, and I think the other exciting part, if you will, is just the new approach, right? The way the Packers do things and the way that we think Elliott Wolf is going to do things. And they've had success with it in Green Bay. Obviously not as much success as New England had, but they had success. So I think that's part of the excitement as well, that, hey, they're going to get players and they're going to get players that we know who they are. Right? Like there's not going to be Cole Strange in the first round, right? Like there's not going to be, just I'm blanking here, but like there's not going to be a guy who you just have no idea who that guy. It's not going to be just Chad Ryland in the middle of the draft. Like it's going to be guys
Bryce Behringer.
Yeah, like who we know who they actually are from watching college football. And not to say, look, Kyle Duggar was a great pick. We didn't really know who he was, but on the whole, like you want guys who you know who they are. That kind of help. Like we all know who Chandler Jones and Dante Hightower were, right? We knew who Devin McCourty and Rob Gronkowski were. So, like that's the thing.
They all became centerpieces of the second half of the dynasty.
100%. Hightower was probably the second most important player in the second half of the dynasty. It would be a whole episode in itself, John. But like that's the thing. I think that's part of the excitement because whoever they drafted 3 overall, we're all going to know who the guy is and be excited about him. Probably the same thing at 34 and again in the third round.
And I'm sorry I've got the yawnings here, but the other thing to keep in mind here is that there's still a lot of people out there that would like to see them trade out of 3 and trade down. And look, I've said this all along. I was on that wagon for a long time. But again, while it would make sense in that it positions you to add more players by having more picks, reality is you need to come away from this draft with a potential franchise quarterback. This is not a knock on Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, or a Michael Penix, but I feel like if you end up drafting a Nix or a Penix especially, you're settling at the position you can't afford to settle. You got to get it right. I still think that stick and pick at 3 and then use 34 as your chip that you could potentially trade and move around and do some different things with. Like we've seen in most drafts in recent years, John, a lot of depth in this draft, a lot of talent. They'll be able to fill some of these holes. They just got to get it right. All right, John, got another minute here left. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I just add on to what you said. I don't really foresee them trading out. I think 2 things would have to happen for them to trade out. Number 1 is they would have to not like the quarterback available at 3, whether it's Daniels or May. And number 2, I think they'd have to get at least 3 first-round picks in order to do it. And I think I just don't see both of those conditions being met for them to trade down from 3.
No, and the Arizona Cardinals are also supposedly rumored to be looking into trading down. They're willing to field phone calls, but apparently what they want half of the state of Minnesota for the Vikings to trade up from, from 11 to 4. It's allergy season, folks. So Look, I mean, you could set that price, and there was that report last week that the Patriots want the starting point is 3-1s. I do think that if a team like Minnesota or Denver has a certain level of conviction about a guy like Drake May, let's say, they might be willing to offer it. But again, if you're the Patriots, you got to find that guy. You missed on Mac Jones. You can't afford to miss again. And I think, like it or not, and I'm not saying Bo Nix can't develop into the next Drew Brees like Mel Kiper thinks, or Michael Penix can't be a good starting quarterback in this league. But again, your chances of getting that guy are better the higher you pick. So I'd say, you know what? Stick and pick at 3. Hey, look, we got the next 2 weeks to keep talking about this until April 25th. So we shall see. All right, John, great stuff as always, my friend. Always great to see you. Appreciate it as always. And of course, folks, you can catch John mostly on the weekends on WEI, but he does some weekday shifts as well. He's terrific. Great conversationalist. He knows his sports top to bottom, not just football. Give him a listen whenever he's on WEI. Of course, you can also catch some of his written work on our site, anyfootballjournal.com. That'll do it for this week's episode. For John Lyons, I'm John Sarianides. We'll be back with you again next Tuesday night. Until then, be safe and peace.